This American woman, Catherine Drexel, where is she here? There you are. Catherine Drexel, Saint Catherine Drexel, I should say. Saint Catherine, God bless you. Drexel. She lived from 1857, 58. No? Yeah, 58. And died in 1955. And there's a picture of her. And she was a local girl. Born in Philadelphia, to a rather wealthy, rich family. Nevertheless, they were Catholic, and they even though they were rich, they shared their wealth with the poor and helped people out. So they weren't selfish about their wealth. You could say that St. Catherine is the first truly American-born saint or American saint, because the other ones we talked about, St. Francis Cabrini was the first American saint. Wasn't born here. She was an immigrant. She was a naturalized citizen. And St. Elizabeth Ann Seton was born here, but in British North America, which then became the United States. But Drexel was born in the United States proper itself, here. So she was born an American here. She didn't become an American. She was also Catholic, whereas Cabrini was Catholic, but Catholic from Italy. Okay. Elizabeth Ann Seton was Catholic, but she became Catholic. She was raised Episcopalian. Okay. So Drexel was born to Catholic parents in a Catholic family and was raised Catholic. So she's a true American Catholic, you could say. And she decided she wanted to become a sister. She saw the plight and the bad situation of both blacks and Native Americans in America, and she wanted to help them, especially through education, because, there were a lot of efforts to educate black people or Indians. They just weren't. People weren't, well, certainly apparently white people, who were the majority, didn't seem to see it as a need or an issue, not an immediate need. But she saw it as a need. She saw that these people needed education and needed help. And she thought the best way as a Catholic woman to do that was to found a religious order, a group of nuns or sisters, which she did. And she gave her name, or she gave the name, or the name she gave to her group was the Congregation of the Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament for Indians and Colored People. For Indians and colored. So a devotion to the Eucharist, Jesus present in the Eucharist, the Blessed Sacrament, and she kind of indicates in the title who her core groups are that she wants her group to focus on: Native Americans, Indians, and colored people. I apologize for the language. I mean, I know Native Americans aren't Indians. Europeans thought they were in India when they showed up here, but that's why they called them the Indians. But obviously, they're not from India. I mean, Native Americans are Asian. They're from Asia, but not from India. And of course, colored people, I don't know what to tell you about that, because when I was young, you weren't supposed to say that, but now people talk openly about being people of color, or a person's a person of color. I just want to know the rules so I don't get fired. I don't know anymore. Tell me the rules, people, But nevertheless, it's just the way people spoke back then, okay? And you still have groups around that do that, like, the NAACP, which is a black-founded organization, black-centric organization, but it stands for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Okay, so they still use the language from when they were founded way back when. And even in the Catholic Church, in the late 1800s, they had a bunch of conferences of black Catholics. Should have mentioned this during Black History Month, but I forgot. Called the Black Colored Conference. Okay, so they didn't think there was anything wrong with it. So, whatever. It's just the language that they used, or she used for her group. And their mission was, as I told you, to educate and address the needs both of Native Americans and African Americans in the South and in the Western United States, to minister in poor black communities. So they founded schools. Drexel University was founded by her uncle, So that's why it's called Drexel. So it has that connection to her, to her family. But others interesting things at schools that she did found, like this school, this website that I'm showing you, is a school that her group, I believe, did found, which is Xavier University of Louisiana. This is the website for Xavier University of Louisiana, which is, interestingly enough, the only historically black Catholic college in the country. Okay, because a lot of blacks could not get into the white colleges, the white universities. They would not be admitted in the South and in the North as well. So they founded their own schools. They wanted a college education too. And so you have historical, what are called historically black colleges that were founded by blacks for blacks with a largely black population. This is the only Catholic one that's ever been founded, Xavier University of Louisiana, by Drexel's group. So there they are. So she was the head, the superior general of her group until she got sick and she had to retire because she couldn't do the work anymore because she wasn't feeling well. And I'm presuming she died naturally. I don't have anything written down here about how she died, if it was, some accident or something. But nevertheless, I'm presuming she died of old age. And in the year 2000 AD, Pope St. John Paul II canonized her officially as a saint, Saint Catherine Drexel. So I ask for Saint Catherine Drexel's prayers for us in this class. Amen. And help me get through Judaism. I was looking at my syllabus. I'm like, I'm supposed to be 2 classes into Christianity. I'm like, I don't know what happened. I don't know how the wheels fell off. I didn't think I was talking that much. I was trying to fly through the notes. But whatever. Okay. God willing, I'll get through Judaism. God bless you. Sabbath. So I ended on kashrut. Okay. Kosher laws, food laws, a lot of food laws the Jews have to follow to show their obedience to their God. I mean, there's a purpose for it. It's not just, no purpose. I mean, they're showing obedience to the God they believe in. And if you're curious, you can look in the Torah, the books of Leviticus and Deuteronomy, and I give you the chapter numbers there if you're just curious to see where do you actually find the requirements for kosher eating. And there you get the basic idea. I don't think I wrote it down here in the PowerPoint. I didn't, but I'll tell you in case you're wondering. In regards to meat, only cud-chewing animals with cloven feet may be eaten. Okay, so there are 2 rules here. You have to be an animal that regurgitates its food, like has a second stomach like a cow, and chews the cud in its mouth. Okay, so cud chewing. But there's another requirement. It's not just that. They have to have a cloven hoof. Okay, so in their foot, the hoof that they have can't be all of one piece. The hoof, this kind of, I don't know if it's cartilage or it's not bone, but I don't think it's bone. But if anyone, is a farm person and can tell me, or you have a dad or a mom who's a vet, you can tell me. But there's some animals have a cleft, a cut here in the middle of their foot, their hoof. Okay, so it's called a cloven, a cleft hoof. All right. I don't know why that mattered to the God of Israel, but it did. So they have to chew cud and have a cloven hoof in order for you to legally eat them, for them to be kosher, be acceptable. So obviously I mentioned a cow, so cow is fine. Oxen, goats, sheep. Okay, they're fine. Pigs, no. Pigs, because they just for the simple fact pigs have hooves, but they don't have cloven hooves. They're not cut into two. Actually, no, I'm sorry. Excuse me. They do have cloven hooves. Excuse me. My mistake. They do have cloven hooves, but they don't chew cud. They don't regurgitate their food and re-chew it and then swallow it again. So yeah, so pigs have hooves, so they are okay with that, but they're not okay because they don't chew cud. Camels are not kosher or unclean for Jewish food because camels do seem to chew cud. I guess they do, but they have no cloven hoof. They just have a foot. If you ever looked at a camel's foot, they don't have a hoof at all, I believe. So they don't qualify. So that's for meat. What kind of meat you can eat? Animal flesh. Has to chew cud and have a cloven hoof, if it has a hoof. In regards to sea creatures, things from the ocean or from the water, only sea creatures that have scales and fins are acceptable. So any sea creature that you want to eat as a Jew must have scales and a fin. That's where shellfish becomes a no-no, because shrimp and crabs and lobsters don't have scales and they don't have fins. So they're out. So any of your basic common fish that have scales, I would imagine shark meat, no, because sharks don't have scales, but they do have fins, or dolphin meat or something like that, or a swordfish would not be kosher, I'm imagining. What about birds, things that fly in the air? Okay, so you have land things on the land, like cows and that, and then you eat things that are in the water, in the sea, but what about things that live in the air, like birds? Well, there are rules for that as well. Birds of prey may not be eaten. So I guess those birds that kill other animals and eat their flesh, like eagles or hawks, you can't eat those. But something like a chicken or a turkey, they didn't know about turkeys because turkeys are from the New World. But, now that they know about turkeys would be fine because they're not birds of prey. However, the Bible does not actually give a list of what are kosher or clean birds to eat, so you have to consult the rabbis specifically about which birds are fine. Okay. So, just to recap, for meat, cud, chewing the cud, cloven hoof, fish, scales and fins. Got to have scales and fins. And for birds, basically one rule, no birds of prey. No bird of prey. So basically no bird that eats other living things. I'm presuming owls would also be out of bounds. And then there's another thing you have to take into account when eating. It's not just what you eat, but how you eat it. And this is certain foods may not be mixed. So you might be like, okay, I'm eating cow meat. Cows chew cud. Cows have cloven hooves. They're kosher. Yes, they're kosher. But we have two problems here. So I can have a burger, a hamburger. Obviously, I can't have a bacon hamburger. Okay, obviously, because that's pig flesh and that's not kosher. But I also can't have a cheeseburger because certain foods cannot be mixed. So dairy products and meat products cannot be mixed. So you can't eat kosher meat with eggs or cheese or milk. They have to be separate. Okay? Separately eaten. Okay, I did this. I thought I was so smart one time. I went to a Jewish deli or something, Jewish restaurant, and sat down, and the waitress comes over and asks me what I want. I'm like, thought I was so smart and knowledgeable. I'm like, well, I know I can't have a bacon cheeseburger, so I'll have a cheeseburger, just a cheeseburger, because I know I can't get bacon on it. And I said, the little girl just looked at me. I'm like, what a dumb bum. I thought I was smart. I was not. I didn't have all the facts. I didn't know that you couldn't. I had no clue you could not mix dairy and meat, but you can. And the food must be prepared in a certain way. So if I'm a Jew, I'm not going to have a cheeseburger. I'll have a hamburger, but I'm probably not going to have a hamburger that's rare. where it's basically cooked on the outside but might be bloody on the inside, because blood is not kosher. Blood makes you unclean. So the food has to be prepared in a certain way. And this is especially true with blood. It's not just killing the cow or the goat or whatever. The flesh of the animal has to be treated properly. Well, first, the animal has to be killed humanely. They usually have a rabbi saying a blessing over the animal, and the animal is supposed to be killed quickly and as painlessly as possible. But the meat has to be prepared so that all the blood can be sucked out of it, so you don't in any way eat blood, which would violate God's law. And there are also certain parts of the animal that have been, even kosher animals that have been deemed non-kosher. So there are parts of even a cow or something, or a goat or a lamb that are considered, certain cuts are considered non-kosher. Maybe because they're near too many blood vessels, or there's gristle and tendons and stuff like that. And so they're just not considered acceptable. So even the cuts of meat have to be kosher as well. So it gets extraordinarily complicated in its details, which is basically a quotation from the Oxford Dictionary of World Religions that I have. So I'll take their word for it. It gets very complicated. All right, let's talk about the Messiah. And do we want to talk about the Messiah? All right, well, let's plow through the Messiah. I've mentioned the Messiah before. The question of the Messiah came up before with Jesus of Nazareth, also with what's his name? Simon Bar Kokhba, but I didn't talk about him. I skipped over him, so don't worry about that. But the Messiah, this is a Jewish belief that emerged in Judaism, maybe sometime in the 400s or 300s BC, before Christ, or BCE, amongst Jews returning from the exile. Because remember, God made a covenant with David, the covenants. God made a covenant with David that his kingdom would never end. And then, eventually it did end, because the kingdom of Judah was destroyed in, anybody, Ms. Crumpton, what year was the kingdom of Judah destroyed by the Babylonians? You can look in your notes. You can look on the PowerPoint. What do you think, Ms. Crumpton? Don't know. All right. Yes, Mr. Prinzio. Huh? 70 AD. That's very good. That's very good. It's not correct, but it's good. Yes, there was a great disaster. The temple was destroyed in 70 AD. Okay? But I'm talking about the kingdom of Judah. And yes, the first temple was also destroyed at this time. But the whole kingdom as well. Yes, Mr. Whitehawk.
587 BC.
Thank you, sir. 587 BC. 587 BC. Okay? So as the Jews are in exile, this idea, maybe I mentioned this already, but this idea that God, well, obviously the Davidic kingdom was a failure, but they believed that their God would keep his promises, so that he must be sending a future descendant of David to reestablish this kingdom, and this who will also be an anointed one. Remember Mashiach, okay, from the Psalm that we read, who will also be an anointed king. Hence the anointed one, hence the Messiah, or the Christ is the Greek translation of that, or translation of it. So it's a futuristic belief. The Messiah is something that will come in the future to reestablish the old kingdom of David. But what would the Messiah be like? Okay, well, before I go on to that, I think I told you this, I might have mentioned this already, but actually the word comes from Aramaic, which is related to Hebrew. But we get Messiah actually through Aramaic, Meshicha. But it is related to Hebrew, Mashiach, which I showed you before when we read that psalm. The word Mashach in Hebrew means to pour oil on someone, to anoint, which is how kings were anointed in ancient Israel, or how kings were installed in ancient Israel, and oil poured all over their heads, so the anointed one. What will the Messiah be, or what is the Messiah? Well, there, the idea has developed. I mean, this is basic summary of what I think most Jews who believe in the Messiah would agree on now, that the Messiah will definitely be a descendant of David the king. Okay, number one. He will definitely restore the kingdom of Israel. Okay, that's two. So there's a political purpose here. He will restore the kingdom of Israel by defeating all the enemies of the Jews. Three. And he will establish a reign of peace. And I don't know if that's the fourth thing, but I guess this is all four. He will establish his reign of peace based on following the law of Moses. So that's four. Okay. And if hopefully you read the reading already in the Mishneh Torah from Maimonides, where he talks about the Messiah, and he gives some different ideas, but it's basically find the same idea, that the Messiah, of what Messiah will be. But people had different notions of this thing, and even today it's still a matter of debate. More liberal, or what are called Reform Jews, usually reject the idea of a Messiah, a future coming king. They reject the idea completely. There is no Messiah for them, or they spiritualize the Messiah. It's more of a concept. Other Jews, like what are called conservative Jews, might accept a literal Messiah, but again, certainly Orthodox, what are called Orthodox Jews, Hasidic Jews, Haredi Jews, who are Orthodox Jews, will take this quite literally. And yes, that sometime in the definite future of history, this person, a man, not God, that's where Jesus ran into trouble, Jesus of Nazareth, because they weren't sure if he was claiming to be the Messiah or God or both or whatever. But I got you, Mr. Belfield. But the Messiah will be a man in the line of David who will actually reestablish the government of their kingdom and the law of Moses amongst the Jews. Yes, Mr. Belfield?
Do Jews believe in heaven? No.
Some do. Yeah, some do. Not all do. Again, Reform liberal Jews, probably not. Probably not. Conservative Jews, Orthodox Jews, oh yes, certainly, yeah.
So, but the difference between Judaism and Christianity, is Jesus, right?
Essentially Jesus of Nazareth, yes. But other things are going to emerge as the two sister religions. They are sister religions. They come from Judaism. Both of them come from the Judaism of the first century AD. But as they diverge, their beliefs will also become quite different.
So do Jewish people believe that our sins are?
Well, who would die for your sins?
They believe that Jesus died the way.
Oh no. Oh, they certainly would not deny the crucifixion or Jesus was killed or executed. But if you read the Mishneh Torah, that's Maimonides' main argument for why Jesus could not have been the Messiah, right? Because he was executed. The Messiah is not going to die. He's going to defeat the enemies, not be defeated by the enemies. And so for the Jews, that was the primary evidence that Jesus of Nazareth was a false Messiah, a claimer to be the Messiah, but not Messiah. Yeah. So some Jews are looking for the Messiah today, some are not. Oh, don't worry about this. I'll skip over this. But I won't, forget about that. We mentioned that already, sir. And that's Bar Kokhba. Don't worry about that. And throughout Jewish history, there have been claimants to the Messiah. I guess I should go back to that. Sorry. Jesus of Nazareth, obviously, as Mr. Belfield brought up, he's the most famous claimant to being the Messiah of the Jews. And of course, his claim brought about another world religion, which is why Judaism is so influential, even though Judaism is such a small religion numerically. But you have Christianity, the religion of the Messiah, Christianity, the religion of the Anointed One. Bar Kokhba I didn't mention, so don't worry about the coin, picture of the coin. This guy, Shabbatai Zevi, he's from the Middle Ages, was actually caused, a lot of hope amongst Jews in the Middle Ages that he was the Messiah. Shabbatai Zavi started a whole movement throughout Europe. Shabbatai, I think that's an E, actually. Called Sabbateanism, after him. Yeah, people thought he was the Messiah until he converted to Islam. He became a Muslim. Could have threw some cold water on the whole Messiah claim. You know, Miss Francis, right? You know, Miss Hoy, how do you be king of the Jews when you're a Muslim? You know, it's like doesn't really fit, does it? You know, I mean, he and his fathers tried to explain it. You know, like he was bringing, I don't know, somehow by becoming a Muslim, he was bringing the Muslims into the fold. I don't know. So it didn't wash. Anyway, so the movement collapsed, as you might imagine. But it hasn't, you know, hopes have not ended, you know. We got this dude, Menachem Schneerson, from my neck of the woods in New York City. Lubavitcher Jews, as they're called. Lubavitcher, I guess because the town they come from was Lubavitch, so they're named after their town. But their leader was this man, Menachem Schneerson, who his followers believed he was the Messiah. And when he says here, welcome Moshiach, okay, and there's a picture of him. He's dead now, but I remember when he died, this was over 20 some years ago, maybe 30 years now, but I still remember clear as a bell, you know, on watching the news when he died, and, you know, you had his followers, you know, in the cameras saying, no, Mashiach will come back, Mashiach was here, he'll come back. They're saying, you know, because again, you know, the Mashiach can't really die, but, you know, he'll come again. I heard that one before. A Messiah coming back, you know. And there are also some kind of, they've become actually a powerful force, the Lubavitcher Jews in American Judaism, but they've started controversy amongst American Jews because they seem to be saying now that Schneerson was kind of like God in the flesh. Somehow he was the presence of God, not just the Messiah. And a lot of Jews are like, wait a second, we've heard this one before. You know, and it's kind of funny because, 52 years old, and my bladder is fine, but you people in the prime of your life is Raina. Anyways, but I think it was some evangelical Christians put up a. Why'd they waste their money? But they put up like a board or an advertisement board somewhere in one of the, I guess, Lubavitcher neighborhoods with a picture of Schneerson and Jesus. And they put on the board something like, you know, right idea, wrong guy, something like that. You know, because some American Jews are really concerned, like they're becoming the God bless you, the Lubavitcher Jews are going the way of Christianity. They're turning Schneerson into a god. Okay, so. Lubavitcher Jews. So even in modern times, we have some people who are believed to have fulfilled the Messiah. Still looking. Most Jews, I think, try to avoid the subject. They know the Messiah, even if they believe in the Messiah, they're not looking for the Messiah anymore. The Messiah will come when the Messiah comes. And they pretty much leave it at that. I think they've gotten burned too many times by other people claiming. Yeah, okay, I already mentioned that. Oh, Chabad, that's it, the Lubavitchers. Chabad, yes. Chabad. If you go online especially and look up Chabad, it's all over the place. The Chabad movement. It's a very influential movement within American Judaism. So people are disturbed by this development, okay? Okay, we want to talk about this guy just briefly, because I want to get to what he wrote, something that's important for understanding Judaism. Moshe ben Maimon, also known as Moses Maimonides. Moshe means Moses. Moses, the son of Maimon, otherwise known as Maimonides, or as an acronym, Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, Rambam. Rambam. You can see when he lived in the middle of the Middle Ages, in the 12th century A.D., 1138 to 1204. He was a Jewish scholar and philosopher and physician. He was a doctor. He was Spanish. He lived in Spain, which at the time was still under the control of Muslim rulers. It was part of the larger Islamic empire. And usually the Muslims were, pretty good to Jews and even Christians under their rule. I mean, it was still kind of harsh. There were all sorts of rules that you had to follow if you weren't a Muslim, and taxes you had to pay. But even in Islam, not all Muslim rulers were very nice to the Jews, and so you had an extremist ruler come into power over the Spanish area, and so he left. Maimonides left Spain and went first to Morocco in northern Africa, and then over to Egypt. Looking at our maps here. Yeah, so Jews in the region, and also Christians, anyone who was not a Muslim was basically given the choice of converting or dying by the Muslim ruler that came into power. And the only other option was to leave. If you weren't going to convert and you didn't want to die, you left. So Maimonides went here, or actually here, Morocco, sorry. And then somehow made his way over here to Egypt, where he set up shop. And that's where he died. And he's just a great scholar. And we have a reading from him about the Messiah, which I thought was interesting. He talks about Jesus and other things and stuff like that. My concern, and that's a picture, or at least someone's idea of what he might have looked like. We have no pictures of him, so who knows? But anyways, he wrote a book called, this is in 1168, he wrote a book called Kitab As-Siraj. Kitab means book, as we know from the Ketuvim in the Tanakh, yes? But this is Arabic. Kitab, which is a related language. Kitab means book, and Siraj means a lantern, Or you could say it a flashlight or something, but, a lantern. So the book of the lantern, the book of light, it's meant to give you light. It's also known as the commentary on the Mishnah, his own commentary in the Mishnah. And it's the first commentary on the entire Mishnah, in Judaism that we have. So it's the first commentary on the entire Mishnah. And in this commentary on the entire Mishnah, Maimonides lists 13 principles or articles of belief that he considers binding on every Jew. Called the 13 principles, or they've come to be called the 13 principles of faith. And he described them as, quote, the fundamental truths of our religion and its very foundation. And so here we have a copy of basically, or a summary basically, of what he identifies as the basic beliefs of Judaism. He did not think that these 13 principles defined all of Judaism, but they were a way to distinguish a good believing Jew from a wrong believing Jew. Now so here, what are the beliefs that he identified? Well, first of all, God. You got to believe in God to be a good Jew. And not just any kind of God. You got to believe certain things about God. He's perfect. He's the cause of existence. That God is absolutely one. He is not physical or changeable in any way. So these two beliefs are maybe a dig at Christianity. Okay, God is absolutely one, so there's no Son or Holy Spirit associated with the one God. He's not bodily, so he didn't come in the flesh like Christians say about Jesus. So there you go. He's eternal. He exists forever without beginning or end. He's to be alone worshipped. He communicates through prophecy. He sends prophets, gives messages to special messengers. That the law of Moses has priority for the Jewish life. Okay? So if you don't accept the law of Moses, we saw this in Hinduism. Like, what's the difference between Hinduism and, say, other religions that also come from India, like Buddhism or Jainism that I mentioned? Well, they rejected the Vedas, yes? They did not accept the authority of the Vedas. And so that was a distinguishing characteristic. What distinguishes a good Jew from a bad Jew? A good Jew from, say, a Christian Jew or someone like that? Well, they don't accept or follow the teachings of Moses. They believe that the Torah has come from God and that it's unchangeable. They believe that God knows everything and takes care of everything, divine omniscience and providence. That God rewards and punishes. Here's heaven and hell, Mr. Belfield. God rewards and punishes people. The belief in the Messiah was considered a central belief by a lot. That the Messiah will come and his reign, so the actual establishment of a kingdom. And then rising from the dead, resurrection of the dead. That people, at the end of time, when the Messiah comes back, there will be a resurrection of all those who have died, restored to their bodies, apparently. So this is what this famous scholar identified as their essential beliefs. This is highly controversial. This was the first attempt to introduce articles of faith to Judaism. And when he did this, he wrote this in his book, it actually set off a big controversy that even to this day, people debate over the benefit of what he did. Why? Because for the rabbis, it wasn't so much like they disagreed. Other rabbis disagreed with his points. Like they were saying, no, there is no God. You can't, I'm a good Jew, but I don't believe in God, okay? Although there are Jews who exist today who would say they're probably good Jews, but they don't believe in God. Nevertheless, his opponents weren't necessarily disagreeing with the points that he's making, but they thought that all of the Torah was to be believed by a supposedly good Jew. A good Jew is called to observe all of the law of God, and not just, as they saw it, reduced to these 13 beliefs. So it's controversial, but now it's become standard in much of Judaism. It's his 13 his principles are part of the Jewish prayer book, and now they're familiar to most Jews. So it started in controversy. It was controversial, but people, started to accept it and say, yeah, that's a good summary, a basic summary of Judaism and Jewish belief. The one God who's perfect and spiritual, the law of Moses, following the law of Moses, the fact that, you're rewarded or punished for your actions, doing good or bad deeds, that the Messiah will come at the end of time when we'll all be raised up from the dead. Okay. So it's Maimonides has kind of triumphed in that way. The branches of Judaism. Okay, so what does Judaism look like? Judaism, let's go back to the 1st century AD, the time of Jesus. Because even though, Judaism is not Christianity, the arrival of this figure, Jesus of Nazareth, creates a lot of change within Judaism. Before that, there was what we might just call Judaism, proper Judaism, which was still very diverse. We can tell from archaeology and manuscripts and all sorts of things that, there were core beliefs of Judaism, so there was something identifiable, the belief in the one God, the importance of temple worship, maybe to some extent the synagogue. It was still a new kind of invention, but a place to go for the rabbi, to listen to the rabbi, and get taught the law, hear the law read, circumcision, stuff like that. The kosher rules, the food rule. Those were kind of more definitive for most Jews. But after that, there was still a lot of diversity of how people were Jewish. Okay, it wasn't just a monolith. All right, and you see that diversity we'll see it when we get to Christianity in some way. But after Jesus of Nazareth, Judaism took two roads. There was a choice with Jesus of Nazareth. You had a significant, not all the Jews, not the majority, but a significant minority of Jews who believed that this man Jesus was their promised Messiah, and they were following him. You probably couldn't have told the difference between a little, Christian synagogue or a Jewish synagogue, except that if you went to the Christian synagogue, they would be talking about Rabbi Jesus and telling stories about him and his crucifixion and stuff like that, and his raising from the dead. And you wouldn't hear those things necessarily, but they'd be reading from the same sacred writings and saying some of the same prayers, maybe performing some of the same practices, like still circumcising and maybe eating kosher and stuff. But they had added on to that their belief in this Messiah, or Christ, as it was in Greek. So they were Messianist Jews, and eventually they're given the name Christians, which is what it is. It's the religion of the Messiah, the religion of the Christ. The majority of Jews did not accept the claim of Jesus to be the Messiah, but continued on without that belief. But with the destruction of, remember, as Mr. Prenzio said, the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, that was the next major thing. First, you have this Jesus of Nazareth and this messianist movement in Judaism that just won't go away. It doesn't collapse like others do. And then you have the destruction of the temple. So now what do? The temple's gone, so you can't perform the sacrifices. How does the religion survive? You don't have the priesthood anymore. But you do still have the rabbis, the teachers, scholars. And so the scholars band together, and they focus now the religion not so much on the temple worship and that kind of stuff. They now focus it on study of the law, and following as best you can the various rudiments of the law. So there's a focus on kosher rules and stuff like that, and purity rules and all sorts of stuff, and not so much on performing sacrifices. So it comes to be called what scholars call rabbinical Judaism. And that's what we have today, really. Rabbinical. You have what you could say is Christian Judaism, Christianity, which, yes, Mr. Belfield, becomes very different, because eventually the Jewish element kind of withers away and it becomes all non-Jews. Okay? But it's this anomaly. It's weird. You have all these non-Jews who are worshiping a Jew and reading the Jewish sacred writings and celebrating Jewish festivals, even though they don't know it really. They kind of lose touch. But then you have rabbinical Judaism, the Judaism that's developed by the rabbis to save the religion after the destruction of the temple. And that's what we have today. And throughout like the Middle Ages and into the modern period. In the modern period, as I talked about, we have the Haskalah, the Enlightenment period. Yes, the age of reason. The age of light is Coin, right? Yes. But we don't look to religion anymore. We don't look to tradition anymore. We look to just human reason, what we all have in our heads. And we can all think. We don't quote from a Bible or a Quran or any kind of authority, a philosopher. We reason ourselves, amongst ourselves. Okay? That's what the Enlightenment was all about. And this certainly affects European culture, but it affects European religion. And you have all sorts of now controversies erupting. You now have Christians who embrace a rational view of the world and want to change Christianity and remove those things that are irrational. So you have the difference between liberals and conservatives. You have the same thing happen in Judaism as well. You have Jews who are influenced by the Enlightenment, and they want to apply reason and rational and maybe even scientific ideas to Judaism so that it will make sense for the modern world. And you have a breach. You have differences arise, controversy. And so in the one Judaism that you have from the Middle Ages and from the first century, rabbinical Judaism, over the question of, how do we adapt Judaism to the modern world, the age of reason? Well, you basically have three responses, and then you have Hasidism, is over here because it's different. It comes out of a different matrix than these three. But these three are the responses. You have those who accept reason and apply it to Judaism and get rid of all the stuff they see as superstitious or barbaric or outdated. They translate the synagogue liturgy from Hebrew into whatever language they speak, German or French or whatever. They stop circumcision because it's just some old barbaric practice from a pre-modern culture. So they make all sorts of changes like that, and they're called reform. They reform the religion. They're the first group that we can identify. Then we have reactions to reform. Some Jews do not like the reform movement. They hate it. They think that the religion just should stay as it is. It's fine. It's from God. And they're called the Orthodox, the right believers. There are others who are also critical of the reform movement, more of kind of the view that you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Okay? Yes, maybe, we don't have to have everything in the synagogue be in the Hebrew language. Maybe just the sacred writings could be read in the Hebrew language. So we're keeping in touch with our tradition, but we're modifying it within reasonable bounds. Circumcision is an ancient practice, maybe a cultural practice that got religified, and made part of the religion. But that's okay. Circumcision is still as a sign of our Judaism and of our group community, our groupness, our community as Israelites. We can still practice it. It still has maybe a spiritual meaning for us, even if its original meaning was just some cultural thing that they did because you were supposed to do it. So conservatives try to straddle. They're conservative. They want to conserve what they can, but other stuff they can get rid of as well. The essence of the disagreement between these two groups, and I think it's illustrated very well in this picture that I got from the YouTube video, but I thought it was a very good image that kind of shows the basic disagreement, the most basic disagreement. How do you distinguish Reform from Conservative from Orthodox? And it comes down to the idea of the laws, the halakot. Remember, there's halakha, law, and also mitzvot, commandments. What's their status? How do you view them? Do they come from God and can never be changed? Or do they not? Reform Jews say no. The halakot, the laws, the halakha is not binding. They're not divinely revealed. They're from humans, so they're not binding forever. And they're not unchanging. They can change according to circumstance. So yes, circumcision 3,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, it was something they did that maybe Jews picked up from the Egyptians. You know that they circumcised in Egypt. Cultural thing, and they just made it part of their religion. But here in, say, 18th century or 19th century France, circumcision doesn't make any sense for us as Jews. So we don't do it. We don't circumcise our children if you're Reformed Jew. Orthodox Jews would say, no, the laws do come from God, and because they come from God, who is unchanging, they are always binding at all times, and they can't change. So when God told Abraham, I want you to circumcise your children, male children, as a sign of our covenant agreement, that was binding, that became binding then on Abram, and it's now still binding on Jews today, because God hasn't rescinded that requirement. It's unchanging. Conservatives, again, as I said, try to straddle the line. And I say conservative, but people can interpret that as political, but sometimes they'll use this Hebrew word masorti, which also means traditional. Okay? So sometimes you'll come across masorti Jews, conservative Jews. Jewish law is from God, yes, I think they'll accept that. So it is binding, it's authoritative, but it's not unchanging. Like God can change with the circumstances. So you have to discern the circumstances. All right. So, through prayer, through study of the Torah, the Talmud, and all these other things, a conservative, a Masorti rabbi would have to come to his conclusions. Is this law, which is binding from God, is authoritative? Are the circumstances the same that we need doing this? So, for example, the law of rabbis. Who could be made a rabbi? Well, only men. Previously, that was the law. It was only men in the Bible that were made priests and were teachers, not women, apparently. But, and that's authoritative. That was authoritative then. I'm a Masorti rabbi. I might not be denying that, the authority of God's law. However, we're now in a more egalitarian society where we recognize also the value of women, of females. And so can the rabbinate be extended also to women? Maybe it was just a cultural thing that only men were in charge back then. But now women can be in charge. So what's the difference, So for example, conservative Jews, I forget when they did it. Maybe, I don't want to say an exact date. If someone wants an extra credit point, you can look it up. What year did at least the American conservative Jews make a decision to ordain women to the rabbinate and become rabbis? Orthodox, no. No female rabbis. Ever. Because the Holocaust is there. It's only men who it doesn't matter that the circumstances have changed. Circumstances are circumstances. They're not God. Okay? Very simple in the mind of the Orthodox Jew. The Reformed Jew, it's not binding anyway, so do what you want. If you only want male rabbis, then only elect males and have them ordained. If you only want female rabbis, they choose women, have them ordained rabbis. Or mix them. Who cares? It's not binding anyways. Okay, let's talk first about Hasidism. Hasidism is somewhat different. Okay, I've been talking about Reform, Conservative, and Orthodox. Those are responses to the Haskalah. Hasidism really isn't. It develops uniquely on its own out of the Judaism from the Middle Ages and into the modern age. And it develops with this leader that they have called Israel ben Eliezer. Israel ben Eliezer. Or as he's known, his nickname is Baal Shem Tov, or Baal Shem Tov. Lord, Baal means Lord, okay? Shem means name, Tov means good. So the master of the good name, Baal Shem Tov, the master of the good name, otherwise known as Israel ben Eliezer, otherwise known in acronymic form as Hoy, because we know the Jews love to do that, don't we? Besht. Besht. Baal, being, Tov. Besht. Okay? Now notice when he lived, 1700 to 1760, okay, and he he was really not affected by questions of the Haskalah, this kind of kerfuffle between reason and faith. He was more of a reformer, a revitalizer of Judaism. Hasidism, the word comes from the Hebrew word hasid, which means pious or devout, someone who is devoted to what they're doing, and in this case, Judaism. He was Polish. There's a question mark there. We know he was born in the Kingdom of Poland, but today that's part of Western Ukraine. So I guess the Poles can claim him, but also Ukrainian Jews could claim Besht as well. And he was a charismatic figure and a miracle worker. He was just a simple dude. I'm pretty sure he wasn't even a rabbi, if I remember correctly. But he was just a pretty simple peasant person with a very kind of memorable personality. And then, of course, throw in the miracles, that he could do miracles. That kind of made people perk up and listen to him. And he preached that his preaching was, all that Talmud study, all the Torah that the rabbis are talking about, you don't need to do all of that. He saw that kind of as a barrier between a Jew's relationship with God, between the Jew and God. God for Baal Shem Tov simply approved of devout Hasid, devout pious simplicity, the simple life of the simple common Jew. And it didn't matter if the Jew had ever studied Talmud, a page of Talmud, or knew the Talmud backwards and forwards. Didn't matter. It was your relationship, the simple common Jew's relationship with God. Because, and this happens a lot in the development of religions. Things can be, and anything, I think, things can become over complex, right? Right, Ms. Callahan? It's like, how do you know everything? I mean, those of you who are like in the health programs, like nursing, okay, or related stuff like social work or psychology. I mean, how do you know everything about the human body? Everything that could possibly go wrong? You ever tried to learn differential diagnosis? Anyone ever heard of differential diagnosis? Well, you will. Basically, it's what doctors, I don't know if nurses have to learn this, but certainly doctors, because when I was doing my PhD, I was near the place where I was rooming was near the medical school. It was just right across the green of the university. So I had a lot of medical students also living there. And they'd ask me what I'm doing on theology. It's like, Ms. Remnath and Ms. Moore, they're like cutting up corpses during the day, and in chemistry class and physics. What are you doing? Doctorate. Oh, in what? Theology? Oh, gotten a PhD in comic books. Yes, my thesis was on Spider-Man. Anyways, so things can become overly complex. Differential diagnosis, where doctors have to basically learn every possible thing that symptoms could indicate. Remember one of my friends, I guess he's a doctor now, nice guy. I remember he was like talking about it, and stress is in every one of them. Yeah, stress. I said, why? Because stress causes everything. So remember that if you're ever in medical school. Stress is the first, and then all the other stuff that all these symptoms can indicate by memorization. It's awful. So things can become very complex, and religion is no different. So, Israel ben Eliezer's point was, I think, that the Talmud and Judaism, Jewish life, had become so complex, too complex, that just the common Jew who's a farmer, and these were basically farmers in Poland and Western Ukraine. They're peasant people, mostly farmers. The animals don't care that you need to study Talmud. They don't care. They want to be fed. They want to be washed. They want to be taken care of. Okay? So you don't have time all the time to study Talmud or study Torah or observe all the niceties of the Jewish law. But you have simple faith. So Besht emphasized devotion and also joyfulness in loving and following God. And that was more important than rabbinical learning. He was also into mysticism. He was looking for a relationship with God rather than knowledge about God's laws. So, dancing and singing, these are all things to enter into kind of an altered state where you could connect with God. So mysticism, okay? And so he's credited with establishing some of the core beliefs of this movement called Hasidism. God is mystically present in all creation. God is present everywhere in everything. We should have joy in all aspects of our life. And you should follow a guru of sorts, a tzaddik. Just like we came across this in Hinduism, a guru. They have a guru as well, called in Hebrew a tzaddik, a spiritual guide. And that's your only God. And that tzaddik is the one who tells you how to live your life, how to properly live Judaism. This is a monument or a memorial to Baal Shem Tov with his name. I don't know that it's his grave site. I don't think they know where he was buried, and no pictures of him. But you can see, what is it? Here it is here. Baal Shem Tov. So the B the shut sound for Shem and then T for toe for this name. It's not written out fully, but anyway. So at least that's a monument, I guess, from where he was. Now, Hasidism, Hasidism was actually seen as a threat to rabbinical Judaism at the beginning. It was a threat. Okay, it looked like it was going to upend all of Judaism because they were basically throwing out the Talmud. You don't have to study the Talmud and stuff. You just have to have joyful living in belief in God and his relationship with the Jewish people. And so a lot of regular, I guess, or the mainstream Jewish communities looked at the Hasidic movement quite negatively. But once this arrived, Reform Judaism started doing away with all the Jewish practices, circumcision, Hebrew, said the Bible was just a bunch of myths, it's not the word of God, blah, blah, blah. So they started changing and transforming Judaism into something that people didn't recognize as Judaism anymore. The Hasids got very worried about that and reacted against that by becoming extremely conservative, not conservative, but extremely traditional, and have aligned themselves with the Orthodox Jews now. So it's kind of funny because I don't think Baal Shem Tov would even recognize his movement because the Hasidic Jews are more focused on Torah study and Talmud study and all of that stuff, all the ritual purity rules and everything, than most Orthodox Jews, which is completely the opposite of what Israel ben Eleazar's movement was all about. So now they're the staunchest defenders of rabbinic Judaism when Besht was reacting against, the rabbinic Judaism that was overlaid with Talmudic study and stuff like that. All right. For Reform, or as it's sometimes called liberal Judaism, we can blame or praise, depending on your point of view, this dude, Geiger, Abraham Geiger. 1810 to 1874. And he was helped out in his work by Isaac Meyer Wiese, who brought it to the United States. But Geiger's a more important figure, so his name is in larger letters. Reform Judaism started in Germany. Geiger believed that the Torah could no longer be accepted as a timeless, literal revelation from God, that the Bible had to be adapted to modern times, and that Judaism was an evolving reality. Judaism changed with its cultures that it was in, and the revelation is also a continuing process. It can be reinterpreted according to the times in which Jews are living in, times and places. So basically, Reform Judaism emphasized a belief in God over anything else. Just basic God. We believe in God, you can be a Reformed Jew. Everything else was up for grabs. So ritual, law, belief in the Messiah, a return to the homeland, Zionism was early on rejected by Reformed Jews as just, again, another superstitious thing, like we have to have our homeland back, that the Bible says was given to us by God. And so the Reformed Jews, or Geiger thought that Judaism had to reform itself to stay authentic. And how do you judge whether Judaism was being authentic? Well, as it was agreeing with reason and reflecting universal human values. So to make any sense anymore to not eat certain foods, or to have your clothes sewn with certain kinds of thread, because remember, the Jewish God is against mixing, right, Miss Francis? You can't mix meat and dairy, but that also applies to like threads and fabric. You're not allowed to mix certain threads together. You're not allowed to mix certain types of crops if you're a farmer. The Jewish God don't like mixing. So Geiger's like, does that make any sense anymore in our culture? No. So change it, get rid of it. Hebrew's a dead language. Most Jews did not understand it. So you use the vernacular language in the synagogue. As I said, there's a rejection of Zionism, or in the idea of the Messiah. This Messiah was going to come. and stuff like that. So all sorts of changes. And as I said, this disturbed other Jews and it caused counter reactions. One of those counter reactions I mentioned was conservative or Masorti Judaism, which is associated with this man, Zacharias Frankel, 1801 to 75. He did not found the movement, but he was very influential in it. Very influential in it, as well as another person named Solomon Schechter. And Frankel, the conservative movement was a reaction against Reform Judaism and its discarding of Jewish traditions. And the conservatives thought that historical study should be used to distinguish what was binding or essential in Judaism from something that was non-binding and non-essential. So I guess you accept the tradition, you accept the history and what's been handed on. You just don't decide through human reason like, well, this makes no sense to me anymore, so we shouldn't do it, or I don't think we should do it. No, let's look at the history. Let's look at the tradition history. Why has this been handed on to us? Did it have a purpose? If it has a purpose, then maybe it should continue. If it doesn't really have a purpose, maybe we can find a purpose. And if it doesn't have a purpose and we can't find one, then yeah, you're Reformed Jews, you're right. Maybe we should get rid of it. But we should base it on historical, concrete study, not just what my reason tells me, my opinion in a way. So it's more a centrist Judaism. It defends tradition, but accepts adaptation and change. Okay? It accepts with the Reform Jews that the Torah is an evolving reality. It is ongoing. It's not a static entity. The Torah, the Jewish revelation, is being constantly reinterpreted and may need to be adjusted, but they're also specifically, they've got an eye on tradition and committed to the tradition. The Orthodox represent, the complete rejection of Reform Judaism. I was watching a video of this guy, this guy, Drew Binsky. He's not Jewish. Well, he might be Jewish. I forget if he is Jewish. Anyways, he has a YouTube channel and he travels all over the world. I don't know where he gets the money, but he travels all over the world to all the countries. And anyways, one of these videos, he had a Jewish friend who was raised as an Orthodox Jew, and was talking to him. Now wasn't very much into the Orthodox movement anymore. Had kind of moved away from Orthodox Judaism, but said that amongst Orthodox Jews when he was growing up, and he was told, you were told that you were not to enter a Reformed synagogue. Before you would enter a Reformed, it was like a sin. Before you would enter a Reformed synagogue, you would go into a Christian church, which you're also not supposed to go into because that's associated with Jesus of Nazareth. But better to go into a Christian church than to go into a Reformed Jewish synagogue, because they're heretics. They don't respect the law. So Orthodox Jews want nothing to do with the Reformed Jews. They don't even necessarily acknowledge them as true Jews. They're apikoros, they're heretics. Outside or apostates. Well, I don't know if they're apostates, but they're heretics. They're false believers. And so this causes problems in Israel because like 50% of the population in Israel that's Jewish, that identifies as Jewish, really ethnically Jewish, are non-religious. They're not nothing. They don't practice Reform. They don't practice conservative, nothing. A lot of them are atheists or what they call secular Jews. It's a culture for a large part of the population in the state of Israel. And then the rest of the 50% that are religiously Jewish, most of them are Orthodox Jews. So the Orthodox Jews control all the religious machinery within Israel. And then you've got Reform Jews and stuff like that, but there are all sorts of tensions. They won't even, like right here, have this picture, actually this video. Oh, actually, I'll play the video. And that'll kind of give you a sense of what's going on. This is from a French news channel, but it's in English.
It's the Western Wall. Leading Reform and conservative rabbis challenge the status quo. The Jewish holy book, the Torah, so that men and women can pray together. Palmer. At the entrance, the rabbis and dozens of followers are encircled by Orthodox Jews who oppose the joint prayer of men and women. There are fights over the Holy Scrolls. The Reform rabbis call for help, but Israeli police don't intervene. After some minutes, they do step in. Police intervention allows the rabbi to enter the Western Wall area.
I am happy to see female rabbis today, both reform and conservative. Today we are breaking the ultra-Orthodox stronghold here in Jerusalem.
So I'm not asking the Orthodox to be any less Orthodox. To provide space for me and others like me to be able to come to this most holy site and pray according to our traditions. That's it.
Last year, the government of Israel did agree a plan to allow these Jews to pray nearby at another section of the wall. But there was opposition from ultra-Orthodox parties in the parliament, and the plan hasn't been implemented.
Yeah, so there's even in the Jewish state, there are tensions between the Reform Jews and what they're calling the ultra-Orthodox. They're also called the Haredi, which comes from Hebrew harad, which means to tremble or shudder. Tremble or shudder. It's almost like the Quakers, around that we have around here. You see the Quaker meeting houses and stuff. The Quakers, but they're a Christian version of the Haredi in a way. They shudder and they move and they shake when they're filled with the presence of God. Or as you see when they're praying, you have to move, or what's called a shuckle, I think it's called, the Jewish shuckle. And you got to move your bones or something. You got to move your whole body in praising God, stuff like that. So I think that's what the relationship is to harad, tremblers. They tremble in the presence of God. They're Haredi, and they don't like to be called ultra-Orthodox, so they probably shouldn't be calling them that. The reporter should know better, Ms. Vesey. Yes, I got you, Ms. Vesey. I see the clock. Sorry. All right, so I'll come back to Orthodox Judaism and the end of Judaism. We'll start Christianity next week on Tuesday. Thanks be to God. Have a good day, miss. Have a good day, sir.